Yes, it's wonderful to see you this afternoon. It's quite late in the afternoon, so you're probably all a little bit tired. And academic writing is not the most exciting, I think, topic there is on the planet. But I hope that you will take in, what we talk about and pose your questions and share with, I think, the rest of the group, your experiences also, because that is the intention, I think, of the session, to help you honing your academic writing skills. I'm not sure how many of you attended the first session that was held on the 26th of October, but this is really just a follow-up session, and this is more, sort of re-looking some of the most important issues, but also hearing from you what your problems and frustrations are, and between myself and Professor Goedegebuure, we'll see what we can do to assist you. So what we want to do is highlight specific suggestions based on supervisor experience and also get your feedback. I'm going to share some slides just to highlight the agenda and also the particular points that we've decided to cover. So if you'll allow me to do that. So you can see these are the points that we thought we would raise. I see there are people waiting in the lobby, Robert.
Yeah, I'm admitting them at the moment.
Sorry, yes. Okay, so these are some of the issues raised between myself, Professor Goedegebuure, Professor Masson, and also some of the other supervisors and academics. And as you can see, those are the 11 points. We'll go through the 11 points briefly, and I'll show you one or two examples also, and we'll have about 8 to 10 minutes per one of these elements, which we can talk about these topics, and then we can then sort of reflect, how you can improve, as far as these points are concerned. What I wanted to ask you, though, is in the previous session, I did ask to prepare for this workshop, and what I did ask is to clarify a few questions for yourselves, but specifically to identify what new knowledge you've acquired about academic writing from the previous session, and also illustrate with examples how you have implemented this knowledge and what changes you've made to your text. I mean, we spoke about so many things. We spoke about, hedging. We spoke about, coherence, and, a lot of different concepts in academic writing. Did you incorporate that? Did you work on that and so forth? So briefly, before we start with these other points, can we just get some feedback quickly from one or two of you? What did you learn from the previous session, and how did you practically implement it to make changes to your current text? Anyone? Nobody? Didn't anybody make some changes? Because, I mean, that was really the intention, I think, that based on...
Mahesh, I think, has...
Is there somebody?
Mahesh.
Yeah.
Mahesh, please share.
Thanks, Doctor. One point is we have just started this journey about 2 months back, so we are still far away from when we start writing our thesis.
Okay.
But points that we have noted and which I have particularly made note of, is that once the discussion around paraphrasing to avoid any this thing. So paraphrasing was one thing I noted, then hedging, of course, and importance of counter arguments.
Mm-hmm.
That was something that was new, and I have understood that, yeah, that is required. Like a talk show, that in the document says it should be like
Yes.
a talk show. So there will be arguments and counter arguments, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that was something I have made note of. Each knowledge claim has to be substantiated by evidence. That again was something very important. But the most hitting statement for me in the whole thing was, you don't learn and then write the learning. You learn by writing, which something I have understood very well. And I think that's a new thing for me. And I was thinking I'll start writing only after 1 year. But I think that's something stood out.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that, and all those points are so incredibly valid. And I mean, that's the idea, I think, of these discussions. Anybody else? Mahesh, I see you've got your hand up.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. So you wanted to take it away. Anybody else who would like to share? A pen? Pen? Yes.
Am I audible? Just a second.
Say again?
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, now we hear you. Thank you.
Yes, we hear you.
Thank you very much. It was such a pleasure to attend your session last week. We learned so much. I mean, one can come into this stage of career or academia, whatever it might be, believing that they know things, and then boom, somebody tells you, imagine you're Oprah Winfrey and you're coordinating a discussion among learned people who have actually gone through this, and getting that and linking that to the way I referenced in my initial draft of my research proposal. I went back in and I was really just trying to find ways of getting a cluster-like system where people who are saying the same thing or similar things in the in-text reference just have semicolons or commas to separate them within the brackets, and just to make those points that they are converging on very clear. Especially that it's something that is not extremely new to me, what I'm planning to research on, but something that's really intriguing in the sense that very few have said succinctly what they think about the subject matter. So I have to be very careful and lean on your advice, especially on getting to substantiate, as Mahesh has said, really situation with what others might have already discovered on the ground. Thank you very much.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much for that feedback. That's very encouraging to hear. Absolutely. But I like that previous point again, thinking about that you learn through writing. I mean, you must just go down and, but that's why we've got the 3 phases of writing, and I'll get to that in a second again just now. The first is basically for yourself, organizing your thoughts, organizing your knowledge, and it needn't be tidy, it needn't be neat, first to just get your sort of thoughts together, that sort of generative writing. Anyone else? Maybe we can take another person before we start. Another person? Okay, I think if there's nobody else who wants to share the stage, I think let's just then start, and we can always come back to you. So if you want to share a little bit later on, we would sincerely appreciate that. But I'm just going to share the slides again then. Okay, so the first point that we want to talk about, that I thought I'd talk about a little bit and get your opinion on, what you think, is the issue of clarity. Remember the 3 phases of writing, where we said, in the first instance, when you start writing, you write for yourself, you throw your ideas around, and it's sort of really pre-writing. It's not yet for anyone else to read. But then in the second phase, that sort of drafting phase, it's called drafting there, you can see, we start writing for others. So in the first phase, it's really discovering meaning, you write for yourself and so forth, and it's still disorganized, chaotic. But then you start organizing it, putting it together. That's called drafting, and then you're writing it for someone else. You're having an imaginary conversation, and that's what we're talking about, this sort of talk show that you're having, imaginary conversation. You're writing and rewriting. So you read things and then you rewrite it to make it more clear and so forth. And then only once all of that's fine, then you start looking for the technical aspects, the referencing and the consistency, which I'll get to also, and so forth, technical aspects. But what I found quite a lot, and it's very frustrating for a supervisor, is if it's evident that the writer hasn't read properly through the text, to concentrate on the meaning and the context, and to ask whether what they're writing is making sense. It's fine just to put a lot of words down there, a lot of, some of them quite complicated words. I mean, I've seen academic texts where people string very complex concepts together, and it becomes almost like undecipherable. Like for instance, the existential, ontological, this of the paradigm, and it's different. I mean, each of those concepts is so, is so complex that, you know, if you put string things together like that, it's very difficult to actually understand. So the point is to make it very clear for the learner. I think that's almost like number one. If you read a very good, I think, a thesis, you know, it'll be so easy to read. It'll guide you. It'll almost like grip you. It's almost like reading a novel. It's that easy to read because everything is so clear and it follows and it is engaging. So the issue of that, so I've just given you here an example. This is of a master's student, and obviously this is a very sort of bad example, not a good example, but you know, where there's a couple of actual problems. This is a master's student, obviously still working. I got this from the person's supervisor, still working on it basically. But as you can see, I'm just going to go through the text quickly. Or you can you tell me what the problems are in this particular text? This is from a student as far as clarity is concerned, and also a couple of other technical issues as far as academic writing is concerned. Does anybody want to tell me what you think is wrong with that, what they can improve? Anyone? Okay. Okay, I think let me go through the text then first, and then you can give me your opinion. I'm going to read through it. There is general understanding that Limpopo, now Limpopo is a province or like an area of South Africa, is South Africa, and there's you can see obviously a technical problem because it should be South Africa's Eden. But, you know, what does this mean? Obviously, it's a biblical reference to suggest that Limpopo is like Garden of Eden, but I mean, it's not quite clear, is it? I mean, who would understand this reference? I mean, if you go and you tell a person, I mean, do you understand this South African sort of Eden? It's sort of a colloquial way of expressing that, you know, it's a lush green area, but you cannot just, you know, state it the way it's stated here. The truth is that even the so-called, now, I mean, who's calling it the so-called Eden? I mean, that's not unclear either, has some areas that do not have all the quantities. So what does that mean? I mean, the quantities of what? I suppose the person wanted to say qualities, but said, you know, used the wrong word. And then they talk about a smaller town. So they said, this area is a small part of Limpopo that falls under this area. It is the driest of the area. Now, this study is in the field of hydrology, underground water. So that's why they say it's the driest of the area. It's not very clear. The area has no river to supply water to the area, and no taps, and is generally just dry. You know, that you cannot just use sort of general language like that, generally just dry. But also the area has no, and there's no referencing, there's no substantiation of this claim. The area has no river to supply. I mean, you've got to substantiate that, and has no taps. So there's a double negative. So the person doesn't say they've got no taps. He says they have no taps, which means that they have taps. It consists of strong winds throughout the year. So this is also a very confusing, because what consists of strong winds throughout the year? Is it, you know, I mean, Limpopo, which is a geographical area, cannot consist of strong winds. So, you know, what is being referred to here? What is it? Very dry in the winter season. It shows no sign of grass or just shrubs. You know, it's very uneloquently stated. It is fully sandy and has very dry soil. It has sand like the Iliad red in color, which is also has to be explained, and so forth. So as you can see, this is, I would think, you know, an example, and obviously it's a bit of an extreme example, but what I want to show you just is the issue of clarity. You have to make things so clear that it's easy to understand. Okay, so any comments from yourselves on this issue of clarity? Is it fully understood? Anybody would like to make a contribution? Anyone? Robert, what do you think of this?
Yeah, well, also
know,
as a kind of advice, the moment that you have written something, just a piece of text like Kosie has just been showing, it's I think the best way to assess whether this piece of text actually makes sense is to have it read also by somebody else. It doesn't have to be your supervisor. It may also be just one of your fellow students, and then hopefully this fellow student is not. Is not too friendly for you. It's a great text, but really, if you're asked by one of your fellow students to have a look at a piece of text that you have written, the best thing that you can do actually to help him is to really start pinpointing those things, because as Kosie explained in this piece of text, it's quite extreme, it's quite obvious, but if you are the author, the writer of that piece of text yourself, then at some stage, because you've gone through the text so many times already, you simply don't notice the weaknesses in your text at some stage anymore. So it's better to just ask one of your friends, one of your fellow students to read with you, to be the critical reader that at some stage will be the role of your supervisor or the reader who will then come back to it. But the earlier you do it, the more easy it becomes to have your thesis going through the whole process of editing and so on. So write it carefully, have it read by some of your friends, and then rewrite it up to the stage that you really think that now the piece of text makes a lot of sense. And actually, what we also do in our series of webinars is that we will have many of them, but every now and then we will invite one of you, one of the students who is working on his or her PhD research to present their work or part of the work that they have already written, and then we will ask anybody of you, the whole group, to really ask critical questions about what the person has presented, because that really helps. From both perspectives, both the person who's presenting, he gets very useful feedback, but it also makes you, as one of the persons in the audience, one of those critical readers that you are supposed to be also for your own work. So in a group, let's not be too friendly to one another, be harsh, be strict, because your supervisors and readers will play that very same role, and then you learn in the process of writing your thesis with all of your fellow students. I think that really will help you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I see that two hands up. Mohammed first. Thank you. Mohammed.
You're muted, Mohammed.
Sorry. Okay.
Okay.
You hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. I would like to talk about my own experience, because I spent like 3 years writing in my PhD. So that's my advice, if I have to advise. Sorry, yeah. My subject actually was very difficult. It was the effect of political polarization on a team effectiveness. The sound itself, it's very difficult, and the topic is very difficult even for me, and it was above my academic level even now. So I was also enthusiastic very much about the topic. So I read a lot about it, and my reading was very scattered back to then. And so my writing came as scattered as my reading. So I write about everything and everything. So my thesis at the end of the day end up with no consensus of reading. There is no flow of it. That's my experience with my previous writing, with my PhD. So I would like to share it with you, maybe, and with the other people there, hoping that helped.
Thank you so much. That is it's a pleasure. Thank you very much for sharing. That's the danger, you know, that you write separate sections, but they have to all interlink. Remember we spoke about coherence, which we'll come back to. You know, everything is to link together. So on the macro level as a whole, you know, from your research problems to, you know, to your research methodology and your literature review, and at the end, the conclusion, everything has to link together. So, and it's got to flow. It's got to flow easily, as we said. There's got to be a golden thread that runs through, you know, the whole text. Thank you very much for sharing. Great. Then can we ask Walter next? Thank you, Walter.
Hello, Dr. Kosie, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Thanks, Walter.
Oh, yes. I just want to comment on that passage that you showed us.
Yes.
It's very unclear. There's no flow. It's not like you said in the first line, the writer said it's considered as the Eden of Africa. But then the statements that follow is then saying that the writer is saying there's drought and all, but if it's reference to the Garden of Eden, in the Bible, it had everything, water, everything green. So I think it's contradicting. And then the other thing is all the statements, they are not substantiated. They are not referenced. Yeah, the writer from the mind, you see, just writing what he's thinking, but there's no reference to say, I got this from this source. It's not substantiated. And even the vocabulary used, the choice of words, that, from my point of view, I think they are of less quality. Yeah, that's my input.
Wonderful. Walter, thank you so much. Yes, no, I absolutely agree. There's still a lot of work that's got to be done by this particular student. I think there's one more hand up, Pen, and then we have to move on, I think, to the next topic. Thank you.
Yes, the thing is that I was going to exactly say what Mohammed and Walter have both said, give a bit of my own experience, which is quite similar to Mohammed. The thing is, I think the writer is basically at one of the first stages where the thoughts are still being compiled, and then skip the stage of actually getting a bit more technical, looking at what other people may have said and substantiating it, and went straight into submission, which, as Dr. Kosie de Villiers said, it is a very risky thing to skip a stage where, you know, you have a light type of peer review, friends and colleagues to go. I really just wanted to throw.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that. Yes, no, I absolutely agree. I mean, one has to get people to read your drafts and to give inputs, absolutely, your colleagues, your friends, and so on. Great. So I think this issue of clarity and using this three-phase process is very important. Then if I can just start sharing my screen again, and then I'll go to the next point, which is from clarity, is to reflect your own ideas. This is quite interesting. A lot of students string together ideas and quotations from other writers, but it's important also to reflect your own ideas and arguments. Remember, we said in the previous session, you've got to find your own voice. It's almost like, you know, you've got to be in command. You dictate the talk show, and you then, you know, use the others as background information to substantiate, you know, and illustrate with ideas and arguments. But remember, we said that your document should be argument-led, by the argument, not author-led. And here you can see an example of that. This comes from a previous student of mine, MBA student. And you can see here the person writes here, basically they're reciting this book. If you look, the only reference here is this book. He says in their book, The Luxury Strategy, and then he tells us what, you know, what it says in the book. But you can see that's not argument led by any argument. It is basically author led. It's basically, you know, the author, this author Kapfer or authors and Bastian it's basically what they said. And so a lot of students, they either you string ideas together, you take something out, and then you say, okay, this is what these guys say, this is what these guys say, and so forth. So you must basically use the ideas as background. And I think if you use such a big chunk like this from one source, then you can't go and review the whole book in a big paragraph. You must, I think do it more incrementally and, extract information from the book and use it as part of the background and informational flow, but not, not sort of, because you can clearly see, as I said, if there's only one reference for a whole section like this, and it's basically just information from the book, it's not really part of your argument you are presenting. You're simply quoting some of the text out of the book. What are your views on that, possibly? Anybody? Anybody? Robert, maybe you've got some comments. Professor Masson, you've got maybe a comment?
Yeah, well, maybe I can add to that. It also links to a part that one of the issues out of the top 11 that pops up later, because I think we noticed that especially if we see your thesis that come in and in the part on the methodology, students come up with a lot of information on all types of methodologies that in principle they can pick from. So you have a topic, and then you introduced it. You came up with research questions in chapter 1. You came up with a review of literature in chapter 2, and then in chapter 3 you have to start thinking deeply about how actually to collect the data that are needed to answer those research questions. And then all of a sudden, it seems that what students tend to do is to look at all the methodologies that are around qualitative research, quantitative research. If qualitative research, we can use interviews, we can use case studies, we can use focus group interviews, we can use many things. And all of those options are then introduced with a lot of truly textbook information, which just reflect what certain authors have said about the advantages and the disadvantages of certain topics. But yeah, you of course you have to take in mind who is reading your thesis. Well, at least at the minimum, we are the guys who are reading your thesis. So the supervisors and the readers, or in general, audience that is quite versed in academics, in methodology, and so on and so forth. And so we know we are supposed to know already all of those things. So we are not interested in textbook information on any methodology. We only want you to write concisely about your methodology. Why do you pick this certain methodology, and then elaborate that very methodology? And at any stage, of course, we can start having a discussion whether it's the right methodology or not. But we are not interested in the full textbook like information on all methodologies which are around. So we are talking about your thesis, your research question, your methodology, and on that we would like to have your views and your justification, and not all the air that comes with just replicating what we can find in other textbooks or on the internet or anywhere. So it's about your thesis, and that also relates, I think, a bit to the issue of reflecting your own ideas, not reflecting just your own ideas, but also reflect what you do in your thesis, the choices that you have made for your research, and then skip all the air, because we are basically not interested in that part.
Great, thank you very much. Any comments before we move on to the next topic? Any comments? We're going to come back to the research issue issue a little bit later on. Anybody would like to venture a comment? Okay, let's move on to the next one, and then you can always stop us and come back to this one. The issue of consistency, and I've just got a couple of ones here. The idea is, that you must be consistent throughout your document, not only in using certain terminology, but also from a technical point of view. For instance, when you use capitals or lowercase letters, you've got to do it throughout. You can't, like, for instance, use the word structuralism and write it with a small letter, and in the next chapter you write it with a capital letter. You have to be consistent as far as the use of that's concerned. The second thing is spelling, and this trips up a lot of students because spell checkers, of course, are set to the United States or to but here in South Africa we obviously follow the UK English. I'm not sure what you do in your so you've got to make sure that there's consistency throughout your document. Words like organize, for instance, that they spelled with an S and not with a Z. I mean, if you're not sure about it, you can always do a search through your document in Word to go and search and replace, or search for words with Z's in them and so forth. But this is quite important. Words like behavior and behavior, spelled differently in the US and in South Africa. Program and program, a lot of words like that. Then, sorry, I've just mentioned that one. Actually, the UK-US issue of words, and then the tenses. Do not shift unnecessary between tenses within a particular discussion. I've seen that before, where a student will write, I will do that, and then, in the next paragraph they said, well, basically they have done it, and one's confused about the tense. Is it now going to be done, or is it being done, or has it been done? So do not shift necessarily between tenses within a particular discussion. And the point of view also, do not shift among you, one, we in one sentence or within one discussion. If you talk about you, or you talk about we, or you talk about, one should do this and one should do that, then try to keep that consistent, because otherwise it's also very confusing. And then also watch out for singular and plural. Pronoun should agree with the noun to which it refers to in terms of person, number, gender, and so forth. So just look at your general language usage, that it is consistent throughout the document. So I think just the issue, Robert, of consistency is also very important. I don't know what anybody's views are on that. Are you getting that right? You've got to check, for instance, one thing I learned when I did my PhD is even full stops. I mean, if for instance, if you've got a couple of bullet points and you put a full stop at the end of the sentence after that bullet point, then you've got to do it consistently throughout the whole document. You cannot have some sentences with full stops at the end and others not. So this becomes critical later on when rounding off your document. Any comments? Okay, I think, Robert, should we move on then to the next topic, or would you like to?
Yeah, well, I can only agree on the importance of consistency, because I think actually everybody, all of the students here present, will have the very same thing, and that if you read a piece of text, whether it's in a newspaper or a thesis or any document, then it's pretty annoying if things are really inconsistent. And for some reason, we in our role as supervisors and readers are especially sensitive to the issue. So we notice, and if you do it properly from the outset, it's like a business card. It's the first impression. So if we see a piece of text and it's written in a very consistent style, then we already have the impression that, yeah, this person has really thought about his thesis, his paper very well. So we automatically assume that what holds for the text that we see also holds for the whole approach that you took in your research. If you do things consistently, then we see it as a kind of just a general attitude, and that has been driving you throughout your research. So see your text just as a business card. The better you do it, the better the impression that we get from your work.
So as you can see, today's session is very much just about some of the issues that supervisors, the most important sort of problems that supervisors see. So the previous session was more on academic writing in general, giving you advice and guidance and so forth. These today is just some of the highlights or lowlights, let's put it that way, possibly, of the things we see that we think you must just watch out for. Okay, so consistency.
Can I ask
Yes,
just one question to you, Kosie, on the topic of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th bullet, the point of view?
Yes.
I notice that for some reason a lot of students use a style that personally I hate very much, and they write things like in this study, the researcher, which is basically you as the author, has been doing, and the word "dear researcher" comes back a lot, and I don't know why, but I really dislike it. Is it really accepted? Would you think, or is it? What is the general preference?
I'm not quite sure. I mean, it's a matter of style. I think if you talk about. I think one shouldn't talk about in the first, I and sort of, but I mean, so talking in a bit of a more third-person style, the researcher, I think it is guided normally by the style guide of the academic institution. How you would like, it to be written, but it's not wrong, I think, but it is. If it's done that way, it's got to be done consistently also. You cannot say I in the one sentence and then the researcher in the next, or but yeah, I cannot give you a definitive answer on that. I haven't really studied that in a lot of detail to see how what the best is as far as that's concerned. Maybe I don't know, does Henri maybe have an opinion on that also? I think
Henri? Well, either Henri didn't hear us, or he doesn't have an opinion, or both.
Okay, great. I think let's move on then. But that's a very valid, it's a very good question.
Sorry, I was cut off to avoid interactions. No, consistency is of course very important, and also regarding the legends of the figures and the tables. Always at the same place with the same fonts if possible, the same size of the fonts, and of course the bibliographic references that need to be standardized completely. Otherwise, it's not possible to go through that. No, that's very important, but that's the final touch to the thesis. It's step 3, as you said, Kosie, in all that. But this is very important indeed. Yeah, I agree.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that. I think let's move on then to the next topic, which is the issue of repetition. A student should look out for too much repetition of the same words and phrases. I've seen that, for instance, where a student will say, well, firstly this, and then secondly this, and thirdly that, and then they conclude that sort of part of the argument. Then they start a new sort of paragraph or part of the argument. Then they begin again with firstly, secondly, thirdly. And it becomes very confusing because you're not sure what's firstly, what's thirdly, and so one must use different words. And that's why, remember we spoke in the last session, that's why I've put some of that here for you again, some of those transitional. So if you use like furthermore all the time, don't use it to, go through the document and see if you use it too many times, and use other words like in addition maybe, or finally, or firstly, secondly, but use that sparingly, and use synonyms. Otherwise it starts, the repetition becomes sort of confusing and sometimes sort of jarring also. So there are many more of these linking words that I've given in my presentation previously, which you can look at. but this is just sort of a list again. So just your comments on this. Do you think you're doing that well enough? Are there words? Because sometimes you fall in love with a word and you use it over and over again. Just you know, be aware of that. You don't do it too many times. Any comments from anybody?
Yes, that one is quite easy. When I was also writing my paper, I was just using synonyms to, if you just click on the word, you check synonyms, you get a number of words that that can be used interchangeably. So it's quite easy. But some words may change of the sentence at times, so you need to be careful, but it can easily be done.
They must be careful that you're using exactly, because sometimes a synonym might not have exactly the same meaning, you know, so you have to be very careful. Henri, you wanted to say something? I see you've got your
Yes, I wanted to add something.
Thank you.
Especially regarding what we call chapter 4, which are the experimental results. Often we have different sets of data, and the analysis is quite repetitive. You have the kind of figure, the kind of table, and then you have the discussion on it, and it's often very repetitive. It's easy to write, of course. It's a little bit boring to read, but in the same time, it's easy to analyze. I think we have to find there some kind of balance between avoiding repetitions and having a clear structure and a clear presentation of the reasons.
Yeah, I understand. Yes, if you have a number of statistical tests, you know, one after the other, and you have to talk about, you know, the statistical sort of, you know, test results and so forth, normally refer to that in a certain fashion, and it can become very repetitive. But I think in general, I think if one just understands, you know, you must make it easy for the reader, and this also has to do with meaning and with making it easier for the reader to follow and to read. But thank you for that, pointing out that sometimes with the statistics, it's difficult to do that. Great. I think let's move on then to the next one, which is coherence. And yeah, it's interesting. This is one of the most critical ones, I think. You know, the hypothesis and research questions have to be linked to the literature review. If you, for instance, and just have a look at this is a real study. I just had a look at a student of mine. This is sort of you know, a document that he pulled together, a master's degree student, MBA also.
Can you share your screen, Kosie?
Oh, sorry, I thought I was sharing, so sorry about that. Apologies. Let's just share the screen quickly. Yes. So, so the person wanted to look at luxury selling in Africa, but if you look at this, you know, the hypothesis and research questions have to be linked to the literature review, and then obviously the methodology should be designed to collect the data needed to answer the research questions. So, you know, there's got to be coherence between that, the linkages. So if you make it too difficult, again, this comes back to clarity also. It is very, very difficult because, you know, as you saw with some of those sort of devices we spoke about in the last session, you know, you have to really explain to the reader everything. So when you say the key research questions the study has answered, according to him, is what are the luxury selling competencies? Okay, so what he wants to know is basically sales teams who sell luxury goods. What are the competencies they must have to be good? So what are the luxury selling competencies required for distributor sales teams to sell high value products? So what are the sales competences? But the word luxury in this context is a bit confusing and should be explained in a lot more detail. And then how best should training be deployed to develop these competencies? Okay, that's a more operational, more easier to answer question. The sub-questions the study explored are, what are the competencies that sales personnel should be measured against? Selling competencies. Now, sales is such a big area. It is so over-researched. I mean, there's so many areas that are over-researched. There's such a lot. So so this person had to go and read a lot about sales, selling competencies and so forth. And obviously it's different in different contexts. Do sales personnel in the sample organizations have the competencies to sell? I mean, that's like almost like a separate study to go and have a look at the sales competencies of people within particular organizations. How can the sample organizations develop selling competencies in their sales personnel? I mean, this is almost like a topic in itself. Can general selling competencies be applied to selling luxury products? So what are general selling competencies, and what's the difference between that and required for selling luxury products? And what's the ideal training format for delivering that? So why I'm pointing all of this out, it's interesting, is that when you ask these questions, you have to make sure that your hypothesis and research questions have to be linked to the literature review. You now have to go and see in the literature, is there anything about luxury? Is there anything about selling? Is there anything about competencies, which is part of training and development? Selling is basically part of marketing. And then ensure that in the end, you come up with a methodology with which you can properly answer these questions, and provide sort of coherence between all of that. So in my view, the student makes it very difficult, I think, for him or herself, because it's like it's stated very widely and very generally. And I think that what I want to point out here with this example is just that if you ask certain questions, you have to make sure that you can answer them properly, and that there's coherence then. For instance, when you get to the conclusion at the end, to be able to link it back to the literature review, to be able to link it back to the hypothesis, to say, based on our study, this and this and this, links in with what is said in the literature review and so forth. So yes, just coherence. It's got to be at the macro level. Remember, I said coherence to macro level and the micro level within the chapters. Any comments? Particularly on this example also, maybe? Anyone?
Henri?
Yes. In fact, as a reader, it's our main concern, coherence, especially the transition from one chapter to the other. Often there is no link. There is no link between the general introduction that describes the context of the study, that is supposed to come with some knowledge gap and some keywords. And the keywords are not used for the bibliography. The bibliography is something independent, and as Robert said, often it's textbook comments and these kind of things that are not really relevant. And then the most important part is at the end of that bibliography chapter. How can you justify, by having made that bibliography analysis, which are your research questions and research hypotheses? You need, in full transparency, to be able to show that indeed there is a knowledge gap. It could be a country, an industry, a period of time, but there must be somewhere a knowledge gap, because research must be somewhere innovative. You must bring something to the knowledge, of course, if you make a thesis. And that's the biggest problem, how to go from the narrative of bibliography to crunching this information, which is not structured, of course, just comments that you read here and there in the bibliography, how to transform that in something coherent that leads you in full transparency to your research questions and research hypotheses. And it's my biggest concern when I read theses. Often this looks a little bit like a white rabbit coming out of the hat of a wizard, much more than a kind of logical funnel coming to the solution, I would say.
Okay. Anyone else would like to comment on that?
Yeah, just to follow up on what you have said and what Henri just mentioned. I think that this very issue, there's no specific order, I think, in the top 11 that we came up with. But maybe if we have to put things in the order of priority. Probably coherence is one of the big issues because I agree with Henri, but I think when we started collecting ideas on the top challenges of writing your thesis, then probably this is the one that came up, not only from Kosie, but also from Henri and also from Joop, and I'm pretty sure that also our colleagues from ESAMI, I see that Professor Mwape is also present. ESAMI has gone through hundreds, maybe thousands of theses over the past couple of years, and time and again, once we look at those theses, it's mainly the issue of coherence that is somehow lacking, and really there has to be a flow from chapter 1, the introduction, to chapter 2, what you read about, the questions that you came up with, to chapter 3, which is then elaborating the challenges, the knowledge gaps into a methodology, then systematically do the analysis based on the analysis of the data that you have collected, and so on and so forth. Just for example, I think that well, maybe I'm exaggerating a bit, but I would say that in 9 out of 10 theses, there are a lot of weaknesses, especially in chapter 2, the review of literature. When we notice that some of the issues that are mentioned in chapter 1, and I think that's also what Kosie was referring to. If you have a research question on sales training or whatsoever, and in chapter 2 we don't see anything about sales training, then something is already missing. But then again, if we read in chapter 2 all types of topics, big topics that are reviewed, but clearly without any link to the questions or to the methodology that follows, then we are really wondering, what is this literature review actually all about? What is the position? How does it help me as a reader understand what you have done in your research? And yeah, that also has to do with critical thinking, and probably if I can just think aloud about what may happen is that of course when you start reviewing your literature, you will notice that it's very time consuming, and then you will collect a lot of documents, articles, reports, which you start reviewing, and then probably in 60% of all the cases, you come to the conclusion that really reading this article did not really help you very much. But at the same time, as a student, and I can imagine the psychology behind it, you don't want to throw away all the hours that you have just spent on reading this very article. So you just plug it into your chapter 2, just for the sake of it. But it's for us as a reader, it's useless. We appreciate the effort that you spend on it, but be critical. At the end of the day, your thesis has to be concise, relevant, coherent, and those are the criteria that you really have to put into your mind. Those are the criteria that we will use at the end of the day to assess your thesis. So be critical also to yourself, and start wondering whether this piece of information that you just put in your thesis is really helpful in the framework of your thesis as a whole, which is often simply not the case. So please be aware of those traps.
Okay, thank you so much for that. That makes a lot of sense. Then I want to move on then to the next point, and I think this is the point that Professor Masson and Henri, that you raised, so maybe you want to talk about that?
Well, yeah, that's actually also a big problem. There is a lot of confusion between the frameworks. You have a contextual framework that's probably a mind map summarizing chapter 1. That could be a contextual mind map, because that's in the context. Then what would be a theoretical framework? Well, it could be a summary and the links between the theories you describe in your chapter of bibliography. And then you come with a conceptual framework, which is in fact a causal diagram showing the links between already all what we find in the literature as independent variables, dependent variables, latent variables, putting all that together. And then your research framework is making a selection out of that. And all what you reject is considered as noise, actually, but you have to show that this noise is not very significant, that you have in your model the most significant parts of the problem. And here also, we have a lot of struggle to try to get the things done properly and in a coherent way. There is a mix, there is a confusion between the wordings also that happened there. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say about that.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe we could also ask maybe the students, do you really understand what's the difference between a theoretical framework, a conceptual framework, and a research model? Are those concepts really clear? Maybe I can ask Mohammed.
You're on mute. Oh, okay.
Yeah, this is actually, it's a very important questions. I would like you to elaborate it for us. And actually have another question regarding the methodology. I will get back to you in words about methodology, because I believe the most difficult part is to choose the right methodology for your research. I had actually a very hard time to choose the methodology, even though I went to the qualitative methodology with the approach, which I have been accused of it's not really a approach for a research, or it's not maybe for me as a qualitative, because everything will be numeric or quantitative. So I would like to hear your opinion about that. What do you think about the difference between qualitative and quantitative? If it's quantitative, it's the right approach for our academic level, because the qualitative maybe it's advanced for advanced research. It's not for a first PhD degree. And how if there is any steps or a roadmap for choosing the right methodology for a certain research topic. So thank you.
This is such a hard question that I would like to ask Henri to to think about the answer to this question. Maybe just as a short intro from my side.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Well, if I summarize your question, can I say that it's about the difference between qualitative and quantitative research, and semi-quantitative and semi-qualitative research, and how to make a selection? Well, in fact, it's something that's a little bit obsolete, to my opinion, because even if you make very qualitative research with the tools that we have now, you start to make some measurement on it. If you look at the text, for example, you make an analysis of a text, of a discourse, or something like that, or an interview that you make of somebody, you start by making some text mining. You try to see the frequency of the words, the association of the words, maybe, that show you how two links are linked in the head of the author of the paper, and these kind of things, actually. And you can also try to see if you make your bibliography search, for example, who are the people that speak about the same thing and that give citation of papers of each other. So you have kind of clubs of thoughts that work together. And this is very quantitative, of course, but it's a help, a support to a purely qualitative analysis, actually. You can do the same if you look at what happens on the web. If you look at, I don't know, Google, Facebook, or Twitter, or YouTube, or something like that, you can try to see the link between the people, and you can try to look at the frequency. When are people speaking about something? How does it change with time? Is it influenced by the media and things like that? And this becomes again something quantitative that comes on a purely qualitative analysis, which is an analysis of content of stories, actually. So I think this difference is a little bit artificial now, thanks to the progress of computers that we can use for doing that. And some of those softwares are very user-friendly. You don't need to be an expert in coding to use them. It's often just a press button. It's important to put it in your thesis, I guess, because we are in the 21st century, and we need to use modern techniques and not techniques that are about 100 years old. Basic statistics are about 100 years old. It's before the time of computers, actually. I don't say that you don't need to make statistics, but you have other tools that come on it and that allow you to do things that were impossible to do because it took too much time before that to do it. Did I answer your question more or less?
Yes, but also I would like to know if there is a certain steps or advices to choose the right methodology for a certain research, because when you come to choose the methodology, I don't know. There is a lot of methodologies, a lot of a way to measure your data, to analyze your data. Which approach, let's say, yes, which one with the best one to choose? It's a difficult question, actually.
I think the best one is the one that you like the most, because you have to live with it for months. And if you hate it, it will be very difficult psychologically. But your question is important, because one of the concerns when you make a research is it robust? If somebody else does the same thing, will you find the same result as you do? Will you come to the same conclusion as you do in the same context and for the same conditions? That's not always the case. So we try to insist on making what is called a triangulation, which is using maybe 2, maybe 3 completely independent methods and see what they give. Example, you could make, if you work on the quantitative side, you can make a regression, and at the same time you can test hypotheses to see a network or something like that, to see what comes out of that, instead of making a classification with usual classification methods. So that's one of the things to do. I summarize my answer. First, select methods that you like. Otherwise, you could be depressed after while working with it. And try to use, if you have time to do it, 2 or 3 independent methods to see if it leads to the same result. And if not, well, you have food for thought to try to explain why it doesn't give the same results, of course, which is interesting also.
Great. Well,
thank you.
Thank you very much. If I could just add, it's interesting that I would think one would obviously also try and select the best research methods to answer the particular, hypothesis or question that you have. That would obviously lead you also in that direction. But the other thing I just wanted to mention, what about Professor Henri? What about mixed methods research? Because I think that is something that also, might be appropriate to lead you to a specific conclusion.
Sorry, my line was frozen. I missed
Sorry,
your
yeah.
comment. Can you please repeat it?
Yes, I'm asking what your opinion is on sometimes, you know, you would need to move to a particular conclusion. You would need maybe to combine qualitative and quantitative and use a mixed methods research. I was just wondering what your view on that was.
Yeah, well, I think if you use mixed methods, well, you take the advantage of the two ones, maybe also the inconvenience of the two ones. It's a question of the glass that is half full or half empty. But I think it's more powerful to use the two ones together and to have mixed methods. And when we look at the thesis that we see passing and that we read, most of the students use mixed methods actually. Because it's a little bit radical just to say, I just want to make qualitative research. I hate mathematics and statistics. On the other hand, I'm a geek of mathematics and statistics, and I don't want to have wordings and things like that. I think you need to have a balance between the two ones to have a readable thesis and a good thesis.
Thank you very much for that. Robert, shall we move on, or would you like to add?
Yeah, let's move on because otherwise we
are
great.
Yes. Certainly. Okay. Let me just share my screen again, and then we can just move on. Okay. So the next one is just a question about the appendix. Where to put, what to put in the appendix? What information do you put in your main document, and what information to put in the appendix? That was a question. I think this was put by Professor Masson, by Henri.
Yes,
yeah,
here I'm again. Well, yes, that's also a problem. There are obvious things that need to come in appendix. A list of bibliography, of references, of course. If you make a survey, the survey must be there. Maybe also some information on the population that you surveyed, something like that. But then you have other things. When you use an exotic method, should you explain it in appendix? Should you give all the details of your analysis in appendix? Tables, big tables, and then you have theses that make tens, hundreds of pages of appendixes, which is not maybe advised. And how far do you need to go in transparency? I mean, giving all the information that allow the reader, if he has time and courage to do it, to follow each of your steps, to check each of your steps, starting from the raw data, the answer of your questionnaires, up to, if you make a survey, up to the final crunching of the data that you can make from there. Just because, well, if you have a reader that wants to check everything and to spot errors that could happen, and there are always errors, that's quite obvious if you make a big work like that. You have always little errors here and there. But how far do you need to put that in appendix? Knowing that most of the readers have no time to do that and don't check all the details of the operation. That's my concern, actually.
Yes,
you could also you could also put the details, the metallurgical details, on the cloud if you want, and you give a permanent hyperlink saying, if you want to see what I did, go there, and you give a kind of log of the thesis that you have made and all the questions that you ask yourself. You put your journal, I would say, on the cloud. That's another solution, but we don't do it for the time being.
That could be a good suggestion for the future, because it is impractical to sometimes, if there is so much data, to put all of that information in. I once analyzed. I was working in financial services, but I analyzed automatic teller machine information. It was on paper at the time, and it was stacked about as high as I was the reports. Now, obviously, it's impossible to put that. Attach that to a document as an appendix. Thank you very much. I think that was excellent advice. I think we have to move on because the time actually is getting closer to, we've got about, I think, 17 minutes left or so. So with your permission, let's move on. Henri, you actually touched on something else. This is another point that you put on, but I then had a quick look at that also because I read something interesting about this topic. And the idea was also about your raw data. How far should you go? How transparent should you be for other scholars to be able to replicate your research? Now, obviously, in scientific research, being able to replicate research is incredibly important. You know, to share the data, I think you've just made a suggestion. This is just very interesting information I wanted to share with you. So there was, in the last number of years, lots of sort of studies done where scientific research they attempted to replicate it. Journals published in peer-reviewed scientific journals. Firstly, it started, I think, with the discipline of psychology. And as you could see, for the past 10 years, psychology has been struggling with what's called the replication crisis. When they tried to replicate a lot of these studies, they didn't get the same results. And I think that's why it's important to substantiate provide your raw data and so forth in your methodology as far as possible if somebody else would like to replicate in order to increase the validity and status of your research. I think, Henri, you also put this point on. You just spoke about it, but would you like to say anything about this crisis that exists, particularly in the field of psychology?
No, I think I will leave it to Robert now this time.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's pretty important. One of the things, one of the reasons that we put it on the list is probably the practice that we often see students who come up with a lot of appendices, and those appendices only contain the computer output of SPSS or Stata or any other software program that just it spends a lot of pages and really nobody's going to read it because you already have to be quite an expert in one of those software packages just to interpret the information. But since it's so much and so unstructured, probably nobody's going to read it.
I suggest to make triangulation actually, and to have at least two different methods. As
I think you disappeared there a little bit, Henri.
Yeah. But yeah. So anyway, so if we have to answer the question what to put in the appendix, don't overdo it and only include those things that you think are really needed for understanding the complete thesis, and at the same time they cannot be for whatever reason because of the shape or the volume of whatever you want to present, to include it in the text itself, because if you put a huge table just into the text, then it distracts the reader from just reading the story as we would like to have it. So it's then better to say, okay, if you do want more details as a reader, then please refer to the appendix. But otherwise, you can just continue reading the text without being distracted from those details. So think carefully about what you put in the appendix and why you do it. But please try to avoid those many and huge appendices as much as possible, because in practice nobody is going to read it probably. So just try to avoid it.
Fine, thank you very much. I think if we can move then to the next point, Robert, this was one of your points. Don't write textbooks. I think you've already spoke about that.
Yeah, I think that we had already. Yes, so please.
Okay, I think you've mentioned that. And then don't present what you don't understand. I think this is also one of your points.
Yeah, that was one of the issues that we actually have whenever we have. Well, for sure, it happens when students come up with theses using quantitative methods, statistics and stuff. Then, well, if you if you're a bit into statistics and then you've been using it and you've been using computers, you will notice that the output that you get from the software program is a lot, and mostly you just focus on a couple of things, but just because the software is organized in that way, you also get a lot of additional statistics that you've never heard of and are only seldom used anyway, but still they are there in the output. And some students, because the software makes it easy to just copy and paste the output into your thesis, and then maybe you do a little bit of editing, but even the pretty redundant statistics that nobody uses, nobody understands, and then often you don't understand yourself. They are still in the thesis in chapter 4 mainly, because you think that it somehow adds to the scientific levels seemingly of what you have written, but it's not true. It's just better to focus on the key things and use those in your thesis, and don't ever present what you don't understand yourself, because that makes a pretty silly impression when you come to the defense and some professors, some guy in the panel asks you what is actually the meaning of a Nagelkerke pseudo R square of 0.7. Well, I wouldn't know, you don't know, nobody knows, but still in your thesis, and whatever is in your thesis, obviously you have to clarify what it means. And if there's no meaning in it for you and you don't understand what's being written, then simply don't do it. Even if the software includes it for free, avoid it, because it's really redundant in many ways. Actually, it might also relate to the next point, just to combine number 10 and 11. In 11, we have put a suggestion to use for sure our prescribed formats for thesis writing, which are already pretty handy, I think. But also, there's of course in those prescribed formats, there's not much on the details on how you have to report the outcomes of a certain statistical analysis that you might do. And for that reason, since we don't provide guidelines for that, you don't know how to report, for example, the outcomes of a regression analysis, if you would use that technique. And in many ways, we see that a lot of things that normally should be presented are not there. And on top of it, there's a lot of stuff in your output, in your thesis, which is really redundant and totally incomprehensible. So for that reason, we do have actually, for example, in one of our next webinars, probably in January, we will introduce to you to a certain statistical technique called structural equation modeling, but we'll have various other techniques as well that we want to share with you. And basically, as part of those introductions on those techniques, we will not only explain you what the technique is all about and how you can run it, but we will also tell you how to report on the outcomes of those techniques. Which is really helpful because there are certain standards. There are several standards in most cases, but most likely, whenever you want to report regression analysis, for example, what you can do is you can just Google it. You can Google how to report regression analysis, and that will lead you to one of several websites. I just used here the statology website, which is pretty handy when it comes to reporting on certain techniques, and it gives you clear guidelines on what to present and what not to present. That's very helpful. probably even a better source of guidelines on how to report your analysis. I'm talking very much about quantitative stuff because I'm much more into it than qualitative stuff. But APA has also guidelines for how to report the outcomes of quantitative studies. Even to link also back to what to put in the appendix, especially if you do qualitative analysis and you have the transcripts of many of your interviewees, then probably you're not going to use it all in your thesis itself, because those interviews transcribed can span a lot of pages in your thesis, and nobody is going to read word by word what an interviewee has said, but that you can or probably should put in an appendix. Well, if you have a certain approach, quantitative or qualitative, you have used within those fields a certain technique, then the APA style guide has a lot of sites, subsites of the website where you can find documents like the one that you see here on screen. There's a clear guide on the sections that should be in your analysis, and then you can just fill all of those boxes with the outcomes that you have found, and then automatically you have a pretty well structured reporting of your findings, and that really helps. So don't just do it the way that you want to do it, but look at those guidelines, because they are really, really very helpful to structure your chapter 4. Maybe Henri also has to add something on the issues that
No,
we just
I have
addressed.
nothing to add. I think that was a good presentation and a good comment on that important issue, I guess.
Okay, so I think, Robert, that brings us basically to the end of the 11 points. We have 5 minutes left, 4 minutes left. So maybe just some questions or issues from the floor, from the students. Anyone? Maybe you can give us some feedback. Did you find the presentation and the information useful? What do you intend to go back and use and implement? What did you find insightful? Maybe just one thing, the one thing that stood out for you today. Knew something that you learned that you could implement from anyone? Anybody would like to share? Or shall I just ask maybe one or two of you? Some of you haven't participated. Walter, are you still on the call?
I have maybe a suggestion, for one of our next webinars. We discussed a lot about the content of the written thesis, but you have also the defense. We could maybe explain what we expect to see from the candidates during the defense in one of the coming seminars, webinars, because they also there's a lot of stress often, and the results are a little bit like roller coasters from time to time. So I think it could be useful to explain what we expect from them.
Absolutely, that's a very important topic. Yes. Okay, thank you very much. And yeah, just maybe last comments from anyone. Robert, you obviously want to conclude. We've got 3 minutes.
I think Walter has raised his hand.
Walter, thank you. Yeah, please go ahead. One thing that stood out for you?
Oh, yes. Thank you. This has been very helpful for me. I was about to finish I'd finished my chapter 3, and I was about to submit to my supervisor. But some of the things that we have discussed in the previous webinar, I'm actually like fixing my write-up up to chapter 3, because especially in terms of coherence, like from the chapter 1, the literature review, and the chapter 3, the research design. So yeah, this has been very helpful for me. Yeah. Thank you.
Wonderful. Walter, thank you so much for your contribution.
You're
Great.
welcome.
So in that case, I think, Robert, do you want to conclude? We've got 2 minutes left, so I'm sure you want to finish on time.
Yeah, for sure.
1
So
minute.
what we'll do is we have recorded this session and also the previous session. So they can be found on YouTube. I will everybody who's present today and all the others who are on our list. So we get a notification of where all the materials and the links to the YouTubes can be found. And of course, is what we also would like to do is we would like to continue those webinars, and then there are already some suggestions also by Henri on the topics that we have to include. Some of the next sessions will be on techniques, some tools by Henri, among others, but also on specific topics, like our colleague from SSM, he will have a session on bitcoins, which is quite fascinating, and also thinking about and doing research on bitcoins. So that will also be quite inspiring. You will get a notification on all the upcoming webinars and the time, in this case, hopefully the correct times and not 1 hour late or early. So that, then we can keep on meeting, I hope. Actually, as a last point, I would also like to introduce the person who's on my screen on the left, Mohammed. Mohammed is a friend, colleague, and also PhD student at this very moment. And from this moment on, he has taken up the task to be the moderator for all of those sessions. So the role that I have played so far will be taken out of my hands, and we will leave it in the safe hands of Mohammed, whom you will see quite often during the next webinars. So I think, that's welcome, Mohammed. Thank you all for attending, and then hopefully we'll meet again at our next webinars.
Thank you very much from my side also. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.